So I've been thinking, what does meaning mean? Alright, just hold your horses. Before you get all, what do you mean by what does meaning mean on me? Let's just think about what I'm saying. Now I want to point out that if you take yourself to have understood what I just said, then you already have some presuppositions about the issue that I'm trying to get at. It's a linguistic one. Now, meaning has at least three senses in the way that we usually say it in the English language. There's linguistic, there's indicative, and there's also a significance. A linguistic sense of the word is going to be more about sentences and the way that we use words. An indicative way of using the word meaning is more like, the clouds mean rain, or her face means anger. And significance deals more with saying something like, that really meant a lot to me, or I had a really meaningful experience at the club, or wherever. It may seem obvious that words simply refer to some other sense experience. We might want to say the sun is yellow is only meaningful because the words stand as a reference to some actual object in space that possesses the attribute of yellowness. On this account, we can think of words as references to actual objects. They're only meaningful insofar as they refer to something that actually exists. So the word the sun is referring to that object that exists in physical space. And yellow, well, without getting in abstract objects, is referring to a sense experience that we've all had that we can point to and agree that's yellow. But then what about sentences that are referring to things that don't exist? Like the sentence, Atlantis does not exist. Is it somehow less meaningful than the sentence, the sun is yellow? Because the sun exists and it's being referred to with the word the sun, except Atlantis does not exist. So then it can't be meaningful because it's not being referenced? This doesn't make any sense. So it's not hard to see how this breaks down pretty quickly. Words have to be more than simply references to actual objects, even though at face value that seems like it might have almost been right. So that model is not correct, but this did create a whole genre of philosophical thought called semantic theories of meaning. Now, we're going to distinguish between two types of theories of meaning. One will be semantic, like the one we just saw, and the other will be fundamental. Semantic theories look specifically at how sentences are formed and come to have the meaning that we usually take them to have. Fundamental theories attempt to specify the facts in virtue of which expressions of natural languages come to have the semantic properties that they have. So semantic theories of meaning seem pretty straightforward. They just ask the question, how does a word come to mean what we take it to mean? And then they work out the complexities and nuances of how that would work. Fundamental theories of meaning do not operate on the assumption that words have meaning anyways. They ask the question, in virtue of which facts would make an utterance meaningful to begin with. So then you can have very different fundamental theories and very different semantic theories, but both are necessary to have a complete theory of meaning. Among fundamental, or sometimes called foundational views, is the Gricean position. This position has become extremely popular, and perhaps for good reasons. It holds that one's intending to cause the audience to accept some proposition is what makes an utterance meaningful. Did you catch all that? Well, if not, I'll try to break it down for you. Imagine driving down the road and you flash your lights at somebody because their lights are off. What exactly is it that makes your flashing of the lights a meaningful occurrence? Surely you're hoping to cause the other person to come to believe that their lights are off. So it has an interplay between your intending to cause that person to believe something, and the person on the other side needs to see the flashing lights and recognize that you're intending to cause him to accept some belief, namely that his lights are off. Grice's idea was that one must not only intend to cause the audience to form a belief, but also intend that they do so on the basis of the recognition of the speaker's intention. So this view is not without its flaws. I mean, what if you want to convince somebody of something not in virtue of your intending to convince them of it, like in the case of the flashing lights? You hope that they accept the belief that their lights are off in virtue of their recognizing that you intend to cause them to have that belief with the flashing of the lights. What if you want somebody to come to believe something in virtue of the facts and have nothing to do with you? That they should believe this with or without your intending that they do or don't. these are milestones that need to be overcome, but for our purposes, we'll just leave it as the first understanding. Now, because this is my video and I can do what I want in my video, I'm going to almost change gears completely and talk about something that might not seem relevant at first, but trust me on this, I think that it is. Collectivism and individualism. These are the topics I would like to introduce into our conversation, but what are these isms? Well, they have to do with the way that we see ourselves. Collectivism views a human first as part of a larger organism. Just as a hand is first a part of the body, so too is a person firstly part of what we might call humanity, and only secondarily distinguishable from the whole. Or if we see ourselves as a complete entity individually, totally separated from everything else, I exist and I just happen to be part of something that we sometimes call a society and a community. Now, these don't necessarily have to be mutually exclusive. It might be helpful sometimes, for example, in a historical lens, we might ask, what did the society do or the community respond to X, Y, or Z? But in morally relevant ways, we might also want to say you're an individual and you are morally responsible in any given situation. I don't think that you necessarily have to choose between these two things in every situation, but I do think that we have a natural proclivity toward one or the other. And it's that leaning, that proclivity that I want to point out in this situation, even whenever we're talking about things like, what does meaning mean? Very often, in philosophical inquiry, when we ask a question, we actually have to take 2 steps back before we can make 1 step forward. We have to ask questions about the question itself, because that will inform us as to what sort of answer we'll even accept. Now remember the oh-so-prevalent question, what is the meaning of life? Well, it kind of depends what you mean by meaning of life. Clearly you don't mean a linguistic sense, because then you would accept a dictionary definition. But for that matter, I don't think a dictionary has a very good definition in a linguistic sense of what life really means. Ask any biologist. The other thing is indicative. Remember, at the beginning, we defined 3 kinds: linguistic, indicative, and significance. An indicative way was like when you said the clouds mean rain. And if you're asking that question about life, you're asking, what does life signify? What does it indicate? What does it point us towards? And then if you ask it in a significance way, what you're asking is, why do I care about life? What is it about life that makes it meaningful, makes me want to be part of it? Every one of those ways that you phrase that question is going to need a different kind of answer. And in the same way, when we get deeper into the sense of meaning, into semantic and fundamental theories, depending on how you view yourself is going to determine what kinds of answer you will accept whenever we offer definitions of meaning, definitions of how a word could come to take meaning or how an utterance could come to take meaning. If you view yourself as a collective, you're going to want to know how, as a society, do words mean things. And so your questions will be directed at the society. It will be first and foremost asking historical questions about how does the society hear that word. Whereas if you take the individualist perspective, you're going to want to know what it is that I am doing that causes my utterances to have meaning. And you might lean towards something like the Gricean approach, because that puts all of the focus on my intentions, on what the speaker intends to be conveying. Those are very different pieces. I'm not so much concerned about society. I could be speaking any language or making any utterance, but the utterance is meaningful insofar as I'm intending to cause a belief in someone else. You can see, hopefully, that there is a distinction, I think, between our view of meaning from a collectivist perspective or from an individualist perspective, whether it's first and foremost as a society and what we take a word to mean and how it functions in our day-to-day actions, which can be studied through the sciences and through mass surveys about what a word means, or through a very personal, individual perspective. What it is that I do that makes meaning. It makes my art meaningful, it makes my words meaningful, it makes actions meaningful, because I'm intending something. I'm intending to communicate something. And in this view, questions like the meaning of life might have to be made under the presupposition that somebody intended to mean something out of life. And you really have to ask yourself if that's what you mean when you ask the question.